Well, hi, I'm Jeff Strong. I'm creator of the auditory brain stimulation therapy, Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. I'm also co-founder and creative director of BrainShiftRadio.com. Now, in this video, I want to talk about some questions I've gotten about some of the music that we do, and specifically BrainShift Radio. BrainShift Radio is my streaming music site, and it's personalized music that has 7 different categories of music in it. Now, it's a little different than the custom program, which is the core of the work I do. The custom program is a custom-made auditory brain stimulation program that's 6 months long, where we create progressive stimulation over this 6-month period to get at the root of the issues we're working with. And this program comes from the original research I started in the early 1990s. When I started actually learning therapeutic drumming, this was the mid-80s, early 80s, it was 1983. And I learned these traditions, and then towards the end of the 80s, I was thinking about these traditions and wondering what would happen if I stripped them of their cultural influences and just looked at the rhythm and the drumming as a means to be able to influence the brain and behavior. So I started doing my clinical research. My first studies were really around 1992. My first formal study was in '94 in a public school in the St. Paul area of Minnesota. And basically, I was looking at how to influence the brain behavior by playing very complex drumming rhythms. Everything I did was at 8 beats per second. If you've seen any of my other videos, I talk a lot about tempo. 8 beats per second is the low end of the alpha state of consciousness. This is a relaxed alert state. This is a state of consciousness where we're outwardly directed, but we're relaxed. We're able to process sensory information in a very efficient way. We're neurologically calm. And this is a great place to be, just to be able to do the work that we're doing with Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention. So all the CDs or recordings that I make for the custom program are generalized recordings for years: calming rhythms, focusing rhythms, sleep rhythms. The SI series recordings, there's 8 recordings in that series. And a bunch of other recordings I did for Sounds True, the publisher, and other companies over the years, really centered on that 8 beat per second tempo. And that was a really important component because I wanted to distinguish what we were doing from the traditions. And all the traditions used slower rhythms, rhythms in this theta state of consciousness. Theta is an inwardly directed state. The deep end of theta is where you get into when you're meditating and you're really in a deep meditation. And then the other parts of theta are for different purposes, but all traditional drumming existed within this theta tempo. Some of them would dip into alpha, depending on what you're doing. If certain ceremonies I played in the 80s, for instance, would dip into the low end of alpha, 8 or 9 beats per second, but they would slow back down pretty quickly. They wouldn't stay up there. The whole goal was to entrain the community into this theta state of consciousness, which allowed for a deeper experience because it's kind of internally directed. So I want to distinguish REI from these traditions by just bringing the tempo up into this alpha state of consciousness where we're outwardly directed and aware. It was also a tempo that I found really important for the kind of people I was working with, which was generally kids on the autism spectrum or ADHD spectrum. That was the core of the clientele, the people I worked with when I first started out. And part of that was because of just circumstance of knowing people in the autism world, and also because I have ADHD. And so for me, it's a personal thing to be looking at. And really, everything I do is based upon my personal experience playing it. So if I'm playing something and I'm feeling certain things and I'm recognizing that, oh, this makes me focus better, this seems to make me calm, I would use that as a basis for being able to see if it had the same effect on somebody else with ADHD. And then morph it a little bit as I was playing for people with autism, because really that's one continuous spectrum. The developmental disability spectrum really is just one big group. And I'll go into a little bit more about how I perceive all of that, and with regards to sensory processing, especially in another video. But for the purpose of this video, I want to talk a little bit about this tempo, and then kind of talk about what I did with BrainShift Radio and why it's what it is. So REI is all 8 beats per second. We had our custom program. That took 10 years, by the way, for me to develop, over 10 years. I started my clinical research in 1992, really looking at how I could take the traditions, strip them of their cultural influences, use the rhythm by itself, and see what kind of impact I could have. Did a ton of research, played for a lot of people. The way it was done back then is I played live for people, go into their living rooms, I'd play, I'd observe what was happening. And then I would create a recording for them to play daily, that they could listen to daily for 8 weeks or so. And we'd watch what changes were happening. But it all started with me playing live. And then I would adjust the recording if I needed to. That took a few years to really figure out what I was doing on that end of things. But it was really all about being custom made based upon the responses I saw. Towards the late 1990s, we developed the ability to, rather than me play live, do an intake form which had a rating scale looking at anywhere from 100 to 250 different areas, different questions basically to determine a profile of an individual. I would take that profile and then play for that person again live. And then it took about till 2004 where we started taking the little snippets or taking what I generally play live for people and turning into little snippets anywhere from 5 to 30 seconds long. And then we learned how to assemble those snippets in our software to be able to create the custom program that you see today. So today the custom program is an intake form, not unlike we did in the 90s, where we get a profile of the person and then we determine what we're going to put on the recording, and then we put all the snippets together in the proper order. And then as we're going through the program over 6 months, we're swapping out rhythms, reordering things in order to have the stimulation progress the way we want to progress it. And I go into a bit about this in a bunch of my other videos where I talk about progressive stimulation. And the idea here is that we're really trying to exercise the brain by giving it more and more complex rhythms to decipher and different ways of working it. And think in terms of interval training and just a lot of ways that you would exercise your body. We're doing the same thing with the brain with different patterns. Also at the same time that we had our custom program, I also developed some generalized recordings. The first one we came out with was called Calming Rhythms. There was a lot of research done in institutions where we were playing it for large groups of people and seeing how we could calm a room. And so Calming Rhythms is designed with that concept in mind of taking all the different data points that we had about how to work with an individual and kind of broaden it out and say, is there a consistent pattern here that says this will work with calming? And it was fairly simple. And again, I've talked about this in other videos. In order to induce calm with drumming, play rhythms at 8 beats per second that are variable enough to keep the brain engaged, but not so variable as to make the brain have to work too hard. And now it becomes focusing, which is a good thing too, which is where focusing rhythms came from. So we basically had these generalized recordings that we've sold tens of thousands of them: Calming Rhythms, Focusing Rhythms, the SI series, Sleep Rhythms. And they're great recordings because they can be used for large groups. I can't tell you the number of schools that have Calming Rhythms. It's in the tens of thousands around this country. And they're using them regularly in the classroom and just letting it calm the classroom. And it's a great way to do it. But I was thinking about, in the late 2000s, 2008, 2009, I was starting to think in terms of, is there a way of doing the generalized recordings in a more personalized way? Is there a way of doing it that's more dynamic? Something kind of akin to the custom program, but not the custom program. Something that I could make available that would be at a price point that made sense for being able to use just more broadly, and also offer more possibilities. And at the time, I had an assistant that subscribed me to Pandora Radio, and it's an internet streaming radio. And I was playing around with it. I'm creating all these different stations. They call them stations, where you choose a song or an artist, and Pandora will then grab music that has similar qualities to it and create a playlist for you that you couldn't kind of create on your own. And they called it the Music Genome Project. And the idea was that they were taking characteristics of music, whether it was in a major key or a minor key, or whether there was a syncopated rhythm or guitar-centric or piano-centric, or whatever the parameters they were looking at. I think there's like 80 different parameters that they use to create basically a profile for each song. So when you choose a song you like and you say, I like this one, they'll go find another one with the same qualities. And I thought, well, that's a really interesting idea for two reasons. Number one, streaming music. This was where music was going, in my opinion. And so I started thinking about what I could do to create something in that on my own. Because we were starting to see a change in the way people were buying Calming Rhythms, for instance, our best-selling CD. Now, we still sell a lot of CDs because for schools, that's a really easy way to implement. But we're seeing more and more schools using BrainShift Radio and streaming the music, which I'm excited about, because as far as I'm concerned, there's so much more to BrainShift Radio than there is to Calming Rhythms. Calming Rhythms has 3 static tracks They work great, but it's just 3 tracks. So you get used to them. You don't get to vary it a little bit. They're all at 8 beats per second. They always have the same ambient. They always have the same rhythm, and you just use them. And if you're just using them in a place like a classroom, it's fine. But say you're in your office and you're working and you want to focus more and you want some variety in the music. You want to have some say in the music. That's where BrainShift Radio came in. So when I started conceiving a BrainShift Radio, I thought, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll just create a whole bunch of music and throw it up there, and people can choose what they want to listen to. And then the more I started thinking about it, I thought, no, it needs to be controlled in a way that gives them the best experience. So we created our auto select player. Now, auto select is where you go in and you choose from one of the 7 categories. We have sleep, meditation, focus, brain boost, energy, uplift, and calm as our categories. And within those categories, so I choose calm. And then another window pops up and asks me a question about how I'd like to calm. Say, I'm fairly calm now, but I just kind of like to enhance this effect, or I'm really agitated and I need to calm down. And anywhere in between. We have 5 levels of what we call intensity with the music. So we have the 7 categories and the 5 levels within each category. And then what I decided to do was, one of the sticking points I've had with the custom program over the years is the custom program is delivered as a single drum playing 8 beats per second for 20, 25, 26 minutes. And it's a rapid fire drumming, just the drums. And one drum is this drum here, it's a gunga. So it's got this kind of soft open tone. The other is one of these udu drums, a clay pot drum. It's got a very sharp tone, but a very dynamic variation in its orchestration. You've got a deep bass tone and a clangy bell tone, and it's really kind of cool how there's such a diversity in sound. So let me play a little bit for you what that sounds like. I'm sure you've heard me play a lot. I'll play just a little bit. It's just the drum, and it's totally fine. And but this is what it would sound like. Traditional REI, 8 beats per second, single drum sounds like this. And that's really cool, and it's great when you're using it in the custom program, because the way that program is designed, play it really quietly in the background. Most people play it at bedtime, so they'll fall asleep to it. If you have it quiet enough, you don't really have a problem with it. If you play it too loud, it can become annoying. It can become uncomfortable. And as well, when we first started out with the custom program, I was working mostly with kids. And I was working mostly with kids with neurological disorders. They responded to music differently than most people do. They don't have the same associations with music that, say, an adult would have. They don't necessarily have an ability to express an opinion about it other than to get stressed out. You know, they can't say, I like this, I like this about this, I like that about that. It either works or doesn't. So we were working on this, it was fine. And then when I started playing it for adults, I started noticing a lot of nuances in people's responses. I find that section really kind of uncomfortable to listen to, or that drum is really kind of hard. And is there something else you can add to this music to make it a little bit better? And I'm trying to listen really hard to it. This is probably the biggest difficulty with the custom program and adults. Is adults, we're kind of trained to listen to music. We're trained to understand what we're listening to. We're trained to be able to follow it so that we can appreciate it. And so having the drumming on there, it's not really something you can appreciate in the way that you would generalize music, because there's no melody and harmony. Most of the time when we appreciate music, we're listening to the lyrics or the melody or the harmonies or just the whole orchestration of the way the song works. When you strip it down to just the drumming, you've narrowed the field of people who are going to enjoy the music to people who enjoy drumming. And I wanted to reach the broadest audience possible, so I started playing around with the other instruments. In the late 90s, I played around with, chanting, didgeridoo, just whole tones, different instruments, a cello or a viola, or just tried to find some instrument that kind of fit the bill as a way of mixing it. And then in the early 2000s, might have been 2001, 2002, I was working on a series of CDs, and I was also teaching at the community college here in Santa Fe, audio recording. I just had an audio recording book come out. It was selling really well. And I was asked to teach there. I started teaching a class there, and I started playing around with synthesizer music that I had studied when I was at the Musicians Institute in Los Angeles in early 80s. I graduated in 83. And I'd put that instrument aside when I quit playing popular music because therapeutic drumming and synthesizers didn't really seem to fit. Well, I started playing with the synthesizers, and I realized, in fact, that that's the instrument I've been waiting to use. And so I really started developing what I call ambient tracks. I call them ambient tracks because they come from this field of ambient music. Ambient music is music that kind of is designed to be put in the background. It's designed to create an atmosphere, just a feel, without having the traditional components of music that you'd find in even instrumental music, where you have a theme and you've got a variation and you've got counterpoint and you've got this story that's being told over time. The stories in ambient music are much more fluid. They're much more unpredictable. There's no way to really know where it's going, and it evolves in a way, in most instances anyway, and especially in the instances that I've gone to with the ambient tracks on BrainShift Radio, is to create a soundscape that has a feel to it, has effect on the brain, without engaging that part of our brain that's set with association with music. So to be able to pull it away from what we generally listen to with music, with melody and harmony and story, and themes and repetitions and building on those themes. I wanted to avoid that. And so that's where the ambient track came from. I started playing with the ambient tracks really seriously in the mid-2000s. And then in 2008, I came out with a 8 CD set through the publisher Sounds True. We put some ambient tracks on there. And at that point, I was really looking at expanding beyond that. And so when I started thinking about BrainShift Radio, I have all this drumming music that can fit in these 7 categories. What do I do with another part of it? Please adults by bringing in this ambient music. It seems to moderate the rhythms a little bit, gives their intellectual mind something to grab onto, while the drumming does its thing to their brain. That's kind of the idea with the ambient tracks. There's more to it than that, because depending on what intervals I use and harmonics and the soundscapes that I create, it can have enhancing effects on the brain, or it can have reducing effects on the rhythm. And that's the idea here. So I started creating ambient tracks and drumming tracks for BrainShift Radio. I spent months and months creating the material. Because what we wanted to do was we wanted to do something no one has ever done before, which is allow listeners to mix the music themselves. So simple idea here of creating a site that allows you to choose a category of music and an intensity of listening. Take it to another step. What I wanted to do was give them ability to tailor the experience to meet their own needs. So we decided to create 2 separate players. So we've got a synchronized dual music stream, is the way we call it. We've got an ambient track playing and a rhythm track playing. And each time you choose, say, calm level 1. So I want to be calm. I'm pretty relaxed now, but I like to be a little bit calmer. A rhythm track is going to be chosen, and an ambient track is going to be chosen from the category of the music we have in that category. And then one of the cool things about it is if you're on a computer listening on the web, you can actually change the balance between the 2. So if you want to add a little more rhythm, slide the slider towards the rhythm. If you want to add more ambient, bring more ambient in. And most new users will add a little bit more ambient, because the rhythm is a little disconcerting initially, especially if you chose level 5 calm. That's the most intense rhythms. Are going to be much more unpredictable than you're going to find at the level 1 calm. And so most people bring in a little extra ambient, and then as they use the radio, they're going to find that they're bringing less and less in. And so we give the people ability to kind of mix the balance themselves. And while we were at it, we thought it would be kind of cool to give them the opportunity to swap out. So if you don't like an ambient track and you're listening, all you have to do is swap out the ambient or the rhythm or whatever, and then mix it again. And then if you like it, you can save it. And for the longest time, we had people using the radio, and they were just happy with auto select. Choose your category, choose your intensity, and let it play. They didn't even bother really messing around with the balance, or if they did, they didn't bother saving. And if they did save, they didn't bother sharing with the community. And then something happened, I don't know, probably a year or 2 into BrainShift Radio. People started saving tracks, saving mixes for the community. And I kind of watched this for a while and noticed, oh, they're growing by a few hundred here or there. We've got so many mixes. That's kind of cool. People are engaged. It's less than 1% of the people who are really engaged making mixes, but they're doing it. So we're really excited. And then I noticed a pattern just most recently, which I think is the coolest thing, is people are making mixes that are crossing categories. So they'll choose a level 1 calm rhythm track, but maybe they'll choose a level 3 energy ambient track to mix with it. So they're getting this calm energy mix, or getting a calm uplift, or a focus uplift, or these weird combinations that I thought were really something I wouldn't have thought about when I first created BrainShift Radio. And so I'm getting to see now even more of what people are interested in, seeing what people are responding to. And that's one of the cool things about BrainShift Radio. So I created a site that we just wanted to have a place where we could personalize a little bit more what was on our generalized recordings without going to the full extent of the custom program, while also giving them the ability to moderate and tailor their experience so that they could have an ambient instrument track, because I knew that adults wanted to listen a little bit. Give them an ambient to listen to, give them the drumming to influence the brain, and you've got a perfect match for being able to do the work we want to do with it. But now to see people making mixes that are crossing categories and doing things that I wouldn't have originally thought to do is, as far as I'm concerned, really cool. So to go on about BrainShift Radio and what is on the music is I've got a whole spectrum of tempos. Like I said, when I started with Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention and for the first 10 years, everything was in 8 beats per second. Everything was about getting the brain into the lowest end of the alpha state of consciousness, this neurological calm, this relaxed alert state where we could help them process sensory information, because most people had sensory processing issues. If you can get their brain to a calm state, now you can help them learn how to process sensory information in a much more efficient way. And that was the goal. But then I started playing with tempo. And you'll notice the different categories use different tempos. I also started playing with orchestration. So you'll also notice on BrainShift Radio, certain categories have multiple drums, other categories just single drums. The focus category, the brain boost category for the most part, I think, and the calm category are all single drum. There might be an exception here or there, but I can't think of any right now. So it's a single drum played like REI with just different tempos. The uplift, the energy, the meditation, and the sleep, these categories all have multiple drum tracks, which is kind of cool. I have these big productions of, sometimes 20 or 30 different drums layered on top of each other to create this beautiful soundscape, this pulsating beast, especially in the meditation category is my favorite, because I can really build in some really deep pulsations with the deep end of meditation. Another great category is the energy category, which goes back to some research I did in the early 90s. I've talked about this before in videos. I had an opportunity, early 90s, I think it was 91, 92, to go to do some research at the California Institute for Human Sciences on this device called the AMI device, which tracked the voltage through the acupuncture meridians. And I played a bunch of rhythms that I drew from traditions and played around with that. Well, in 2001, I came out with a recording called Revitalize Your Body. Now, Revitalize Your Body was part of a 4-CD set that I created about that time. And this one was centered on the acupuncture meridians. And so I used these rhythms that I learned and kind of tested it with the AMI device and developed these big productions of many, many drums playing the meridians. And the meridians are paired. Actually, I'm using the elements. And so the elements are paired meridian rhythms. So it's kind of cool the way the orchestration and the composition goes between one rhythm and another rhythm. And these rhythms are very bizarre. And I added a whole bunch of instruments to them to make them kind of cool. And then we added the ambient tracks. And it's really fun to listen to. Something you can more listen to, whereas with the focusing, brain boost, calm, you're going to want to have it really quiet. Don't really listen, just have it on. The ambient track becomes the distraction for the drumming to do its thing. But if you're listening to the energy or uplift or meditation, sometimes it's just more than that. It's just something really enjoyable. So BrainShift Radio has evolved into this thing that is just a place for me to be able to put new music on all the time. as well as a place for community to be able to build these incredible mixes. So if you haven't tried BrainShift Radio yet, I highly recommend it. It's really fun. We've got 7 categories, 5 levels for each category. You go in and you can try just auto-select and let the radio play your category, and then thumbs up or thumbs down. Actually, it's more than that. We decided thumbs up, thumbs down was just too broad of a way of looking at it. We have a star rating, 1 to 5 stars. If you choose 4 or 5 stars, you're going to hear that track more. If you choose 1 star, you'll never hear it again. And so the idea is that we can start learning what works for you. But beyond that, to be able to mix your own music is kind of cool. So if you haven't tried BSR yet, definitely get a try, brainshiftradio.com. Otherwise, in my next video, I'm going to play a little bit of the different rhythms we have in BrainShift Radio, so you can get an idea of the diversity of what's going on there. But until then, I'm going to play a little bit. I'm going to play basic calm. I'm going to slow it down a little bit from the tempo I played earlier, which is 8 beats per second. And slow it down to 7.5, because I want to kind of create just a little bit deeper of experience for you. I'll play similar rhythms, and you can just see how this feels a little different than playing just slightly faster than I did. Until then, I'll see you in the next video.